Geist started initially in 2002. We were doing some initial development after speaking with Nintendo of America about some of the titles that they were interested in doing. And we learned that they were keen to come up with a unique Nintendo first-person shooter, first-person action game, really more, is what they were looking for. Around that time, we started thinking of how we could take the traditional first-person action games and fold in some unique new aspect that would give the game a twist, that would give it the uniqueness that Nintendo was looking for. And we came up with, some people started toying with the idea of like the Invisible Man kind of thing, and being able to walk around unnoticed, manipulate people, see their reactions, toy with them, eavesdrop, that kind of thing. That had been done a little bit in some games, but really never fully exploited. And but as a character, the Invisible Man thing didn't go very far in our discussions. We thought that there wasn't much more that you could do. What else could you do as an Invisible Man? You couldn't really become too active. It seemed to be just kind of a design dead end. And then we switched over to started thinking about a ghost, who could become more active, who could have other powers and so forth. And I think that was pretty much the genesis of the Geist concept. We worked very closely both with Nintendo of America and Nintendo of Japan. Closer than we've worked with any publisher ever before. Nintendo of Japan we were in constant direct contact with. Emails every day, calls every week, visits every 6 to 8 weeks. The visits would last 2 weeks, 1 to 2 weeks of 12-hour conferences and or meetings, locked away in the conference room, only stopping long enough to walk across the street to the the cafeteria to get something to eat, and then back at it. So throughout the process, they were very deeply involved, and we collaborated. It was a great collaboration. We worked closely with them. It wasn't a top-down design, so to speak. There were a couple of things that Nintendo brought to the party, so to speak. I mean, they contributed at all levels across the entire design, but there were a couple of key elements. Initially, I think the team envisioned Geist more as a scary first-person shooter or first-person adventure game. But as we started to develop that idea, working with Nintendo of Japan in particular is a very exploratory process. They like to try things, see if it's fun, always thinking of things from the gamer's perspective. Will this be fun? Will it be cool? What would it be neat to do? That kind of thing. So they're always willing to try new things and see how they work out and so forth. One of those things, throughout this exploration, what they pushed the game more and more towards, instead of being a first-person action game, it was going to be a possession game, a game about possessing things and what the player could do with that mechanic. And it came to a point where Miyamoto pushed it so far. That was his thing. Miyamoto-san wanted it to be a possession game, and what did that mean? We wanted to know what that meant, and at some point he said, well, I want to know what it would be like to possess objects, to possess a camera, to possess a box, to possess dog food, all these sorts of things, and how would you use those? And we spent many hours in one of Nintendo of Japan's visits going over that idea and trying to figure out what we could do with it, how we could turn it into a play mechanic, what things the player could do with it, and how to merge it into our existing gameplay elements, like the scares that you were doing to scare the NPCs in the world before you could possess them. This possessing objects thing came up about halfway through development. So it was really a big kind of a turning point, and it took some time to get our head around it and figure it out. But eventually, initially in Geist, you were going to use your ghost powers to manipulate objects in the world, and that would in turn scare the characters that you could then possess. With the object possession idea, that became you become the object and do things with it to attract or scare NPCs in the world, and then you could possess them. Later in the game, the player will come into weapons that have been built based on some of the enemy's weapons, and not the human enemies, but the more monstrous enemies that the player will encounter. So you have enemies that are kind of a cross between, or weapons that are more of a cross between a modern kind of an advanced weapon, but with kind of biological implants or so forth to get more exotic weapons. Geist has got a very large variety, a pretty good number of boss battles, and a good amount of variety in them. Again, Geist, we've really tried to lean Geist towards the possession mechanics. So, yeah, many of the boss battles do involve using possession in unique ways to defeat the enemies, as any game wants you to use the tools of the game to defeat the bosses. But there's a wide variety of bosses, both in their behaviors and what the player's expected to do to best them. In Geist, the player's progression is more about reveals itself more in the kind of objects and situations that they find themselves in, and how to use their basic abilities to puzzle their way through those situations. So more than getting a new power, more than the player getting a new power, they'll find an object that they can possess and lets them and gives them a new power. In Geist, the things that you possess become your tools, whether it's a weapon or a bouncing ball or a character who has a key or some knowledge of an event. In Geist, that's kind of the twist. You possess things, and what you possess gives you the tools that you use to work your way through these puzzles. Now that we're done with Geist, I'm very happy with the results. It's a very different game, I think, that now, here at the end, than what any of us initially envisioned. It's been a very interesting development process, very exploratory, very educational experience with Nintendo of Japan and U.S. And I think in the end, Geist there's a lot of things to be very proud of in Geist. As an owner, I'm most proud that Geist brings something different to the market. It's not a run-of-the-mill first-person shooter, first-person action game. It's a kind of game that only brave companies and brave publishers would put together and finish. And I think the industry needs more of that, more innovation to kind of breathe some life back into our sequel-driven, license-driven market that we live in now. We developed a very close relationship with Nintendo throughout the development of Geist, and we really enjoyed working with them, and I think that's a two-way street. We hope very much to work with them again in the future, but I can't really talk about anything that's going on right now. So.